guys have done. So you guys ready to have a good time as you learn about perspective this morning? The answer is yes. Shake your head like this. You're going to have a good time. Okay. One of my favorite books in the Bible is the book of Philippians. And so we're going to, for the next several weeks, look at some things out of the book of Philippians. But I want to kind of give you a little context about that book before we talk about it. Paul wrote this letter to the church in Philippi. He had started that church on his second missionary journey. Now remember, Paul had several missionary journeys. During his second missionary journey, he began the church at Philippi. And that was around 52 AD that church was established. And Paul had this kind of unique relationship with them. And they're one of the churches that really loved Paul deeply and really loved the work that he had done. And so they actually took up an offering on Paul's behalf, because if you remember, Paul didn't take any money for his ministry. He said, I could, but I'm not going to, because I don't want any criticism from people for why I'm doing this, because they were already suspect of him because of his past. And so he said, I'm just not going down that path. And so about 10 years after the church was established, they took up an offering for Paul, and they had sent it to him. And this letter is kind of a response to that. It's a thank you letter. It's a letter about joy. It's a letter to say, hey, I commend you. But also he takes some time, as he does in everything that he writes, to encourage them in some areas. And so we're going to look at some of that over the next several weeks together. So this is kind of a brotherly, loving letter of instruction. Okay, it's not like if you read the book, the letters to the Corinthian church, which they were sheer correction. I mean, you read those letters, you go, Paul was not at all happy with the Corinthians and what they were doing, and so he came down on them pretty hard. But this is a letter to a church that he loves deeply, that is already right where they need to be, but there's still some things he wants to challenge them with. So he's saying thank you, but he also wants them to change some perspectives about how they're looking at life, because the major theme of the book is joy. So as you read through the book, you'll see joy comes up over and over again. But we're going to talk about perspectives, because that has a lot to do with the joy that we experience in life. So have you ever been in a situation where someone kind of told you about a person in advance, and you kind of formulated an idea of what that person was like, and you already had kind of a bias in one way, but then you met them and got to know them? And what happened? Your perspective did what? It changed. They weren't who you thought they were based on what was described to you. And so your perspective changed because you spent time with them. Have you ever had an experience where you're having a really awful day? I mean, your day is just kind of really cruddy, but then you hear about someone else whose day you would never want to live. And all of a sudden you think, my day isn't so bad. What did we have during that moment? We had a change of perspective. Life changed our perspective about what we were going through. You know, we all have these moments where how we're thinking about a situation, how we're looking at a situation, how we're kind of evaluating an individual or a problem, when we begin to see more deeply what's going on, or we get to get all the facts, it changes our perspective from what we thought initially to a much clearer perspective today. And that's important for us as Christians in life, is to gain the proper perspective so that we can deal with life in a proper way. So let's get to where Paul is in this story, in this letter that he's writing. He is writing from a Roman prison. Okay? Paul always wanted to go to Rome. He always wanted to freely preach the gospel to Rome. And I love the fact that God says, I'll send you to Rome, but he didn't tell him how he was going to get him there. So he lets him go to Rome, but he has him go not as a free man, but as a prisoner, awaiting his execution. He's waiting a trial to ultimately lead to his execution, and that's what's going on in here. And Acts chapter 28 tells us that he was locked up there for like 2 years in prison, chained to a Roman soldier 24/7, 365. I mean, there were 4 shifts. Every 6 hours, a new soldier would be chained to him for his whole time that he was in prison. He dreamed there of going as a preacher, and he ended up going as a prisoner. A whole different picture than what he had planned. But in this, you'll see that in the midst of his circumstance, he's not depressed and angry and upset about where he finds himself. He changes his perspective, and you see that joy reigns supreme. He looks at the situation a lot differently. So let's kind of pick it up right here in Philippians chapter 1, starting with verse 2, and notice what it says. Grace and peace to you from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. I thank my God every time I remember you. In all my prayers for all of you, I always pray with what? With joy, because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. Being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. It is right for me to feel this way about all of you, since I have you in my heart, for whether I am in chains or defending and confirming the gospel, all of you share in God's grace with me. Now, it's kind of interesting. He says, whether I am in chains. The people in Philippi don't know that he's imprisoned at this moment. And he's kind of prepping them with this letter that life has changed for him. The person that they love dearly, his life is really challenged now. And he's basically saying, even if I'm in chains, okay, which he's going to tell them shortly that he is, but even if I'm in chains, okay, God's grace is there. And so he begins to prep them for that. I mean, he would have rather been a free preacher than a prisoner. That's really what he wanted. Sometimes we don't get what we want, and we wish we had something different. So let me ask you a question right now. Is there something right now that you wish was different in your life? Is there something right now in your life that you wish was different? You're going, I wish I could change that situation. I wish this would be different. I wish maybe something in me would be different. You know, I mean, this happens all the time. When you're younger, you always wish that you were older, right? And then when you're older, you're always wishing that you were younger. I mean, it's just like we can't be content with the age that we're at. You know, maybe you're in a job and you wish you had a different job or a better job or a more satisfying job, or maybe you're not satisfied with the city that you live in. I mean, who doesn't want to live in Chubbuck and Pocatello, Idaho? I mean, you'd be crazy not to want to live here after you live somewhere else, but you might not be happy with where you find yourself, and you're thinking, it would be better if we could move somewhere else. I wish we could do that, but you feel like you're stuck here. Or maybe it's your marriage, and you're going, I wish I was married, and you're wishing that you were married and hoping that you can find something, and then that maybe you're married and saying, I wish maybe I was never married. No, I don't want to say that. That's terrible, isn't it? No, but we sometimes always look at situations and say, I just wish it was different than what it currently is. I wish my situation was different than it currently is. I mean, I really wish, and people desire to have, because I really wish I could have children. And then there's people with children that's saying, I really wish I didn't have any children, right? It could be because of the challenge that children brings. It works both ways. We're always kind of struggling in life with this idea of, I wish I had something different. I wish it was different. I wish it could be different. I wish I could change things. Paul wished he could come as a free preacher, and now he's a prisoner. And if anybody in the Bible could say, I wish it was different, it would be him. It would be him. And so there's some key things that I think we need to understand as we walk through this. There's three keys of understanding here that we need to kind of grab a hold of. And the first one is this. We all have a what and don't understand the why. Now, what do I mean by that? In our lives, we all have a what. A what is the situation, that situation that you find yourself in. We all have a what, but we don't understand the why. Why is it, God, that I'm having this happen to me? Why is this situation upon me? Why is it that I find myself stuck here? Why is it that I can't have something different? You know, we all have that what that's going on in our life, whatever that what is for you right now, and we don't always understand the why. I mean, we're always asking that, why am I going through this? Why am I going through this? And we don't always understand that. And that's normal for us to want to understand the what's in life. Okay? I need to know the why behind the what, because if I knew that, I would be able to handle it better. So we struggle with that, and the trouble is we don't always get to see that, do we? We don't always have that for us. But here's the second truth we're going to hang on during this series. God always has a why behind a what. You can take assurance in your life that there is always a why behind the what that God has you in. Whatever your situation is, God says there's a why behind it. I have a purpose behind it. There's a reason behind it. There's something that can come out of it, and we're going to explore that a little bit. But there is always a why behind the what, even if we don't know it. God says, I've got a plan. I'm working it out. There's a why here. There's an answer to that question. You may not know it. And this is where the challenge really comes to us as people, because we want that answer. So this third truth is important for us. I don't have to understand why to trust God in the what. Okay? I don't have to understand the reason why I'm going through something or the situation that I find myself in to trust God with the what. Whatever it is, I can trust Him even if I don't know what's going on. This is an important perspective change, because that's what we're going to see in Paul's situation, is that he could have had one perspective, but his perspective has changed, and he sees that God is doing something. So, normally when life gets hard, what's the first question we ask? Why me? Yeah, that's it. Why me? Okay? Here's what I'd rather see you ask. Now what? That's the very first thing we should ask. Not why me, but now what, God? Now that I'm in this situation, what do you want me to do? What is it that you want from me? In fact, notice what it says in the first part of verse 12 of that chapter. It says, now I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me. Now stop right there. That what has happened to me. It says, I want you to know something's happened. There's a what that's going on. There is a what that's going on. Okay? What has happened to you? And Paul's going to talk about his what in just a moment, but what has happened in your life? Okay? Is it a relational problem? Is it a financial problem? Is it a health challenge? Is it just you feel overwhelmed? Or maybe some of you are really blessed beyond compare and you're going, what's that all about too? And you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. You know what that feeling's like? Everything's going great and you're going, oh, something's coming. I know it, because it never stays like this for very long. Whatever that what is it for you? Paul says, there's a what in my life. But notice how he looks at it. He says, this has happened to me, has really served to advance the gospel. Okay? This what that has happened to me, the next verse, part of that verse says, has really served to advance the gospel. That's the what. Something has happened, but it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. Something has come out of this that maybe he hadn't expected. Now, that word advance, that's a military term. Okay, it's not just to improve. It literally means to move forward, to pioneer, to basically, it was used to describe the people that would go ahead of a marching army and clear the path so that that the army could come through. And what he's saying is here, what has happened to me is clearing a path for something. It's going to cause an advance of the gospel. It's making way for the gospel to have a greater impact. He is beginning to change his perspective. I'm not a prisoner. God is doing something through my imprisonment to clear the way for the gospel. And he is beginning to gain that perspective, cutting that undergrowth out of the way. Okay? And you could be in a place in your life right now where you're saying, well, this just isn't good. This is really a bad place to be. I don't want to be here. I never planned on being here. There's nothing good that I can see coming out of the place that I am right now. But I want you to stop for a moment, begin to think like Paul began to think, and challenge yourself to change your perspective. Because what you might think is awful, God may have something good in store. You just can't see it because you're not Him. You can't see that. I mean, God is great at turning obstacles into opportunities. He does it all the time. We may have an obstacle in life, and God says, let me use that as an opportunity to grow you, to challenge you, to strengthen you, to advance the gospel, to do something you would never have thought possible. If you hadn't gone through this, I couldn't have done that. I need you to look at this from a different perspective. I mean, our setbacks can be God's set-ups. You know, we feel like God's like, He's like, I'm setting you up here. You don't realize it, but yeah, you're going through this, but there's something you have to realize that you're at the end of this. And even in Paul's instance, the prison that you find yourself in can end up being the pulpit that you get to preach from. Okay? It's where your message can come from. For him, he was a prisoner, but it became his pulpit. In other words, there could be purpose in your prison. And whatever prison you find yourself in right now, there's purpose behind it. If we can learn to change our perspective. We need to begin to look at the situations in life that we go through and ask the question, now what? Not why me? Because there is a purpose behind whatever it is that you're going through. How many of you remember back, really it was popular in the 80s, a little bit in the 90s, Magic Eye? Who remembers Magic Eye? Go ahead and bring that up on the screen if you would, guys, while I talk about it a little bit. There you go. You might want to bring the house lights down just a little. Start staring at the screen. What was Magic Eye all about? That was perspective. There is a picture within a picture here, and some of you are already looking to try to find it. If you do, just raise your hand. I'll give you a hint. There's two dolphins, two sharks, one above, one below, and a reef off to the right side. It's there. I looked at it again this morning to make sure I could see it again. And what do they do when you watch this? How many of you, this drives people nuts, doesn't it? I don't want to do that. That's just so hard to do that. You have to kind of lose yourself in the picture. You kind of have to blur your vision. You kind of have to let things pop out. And then when you do this well, what happens? All of a sudden it's there, and it's three-dimensional, and it seems you move your head from side to side, and it's still there. And anybody find it yet up there? A couple in the back. That's awesome, you guys. What's happening with this? And you guys can go ahead and take that off the screen. That's fine. What's happening with these kinds of pictures? What you're doing is you have to change your perspective. You can't just look at the picture. You have to look through the picture. Because if you know about doing these things, you could stare at it for hours, and if you just look at the picture, you will never see anything. You'll only see what's directly in front of you. But when you let your eyes look through the picture, okay, things kind of get out of focus all of a sudden, then all of a sudden everything comes into focus, and you go, wow, it was there all along. I just couldn't see it because I couldn't see through the picture. I couldn't see through the situation. I didn't see what laid beyond my perspective. I had to allow my perspective to change, and all of a sudden the picture came out of that. And that's what it's like with God. We have this moment in front of us, this picture that we find ourselves in, and we get so wrapped up looking at the picture, we can't see the forest for the trees, right? We have this difficulty of seeing what's in this because we can't look through it. And God challenges us to gain a new perspective by looking through our situation so that things can become clear. In fact, this is what it says in verse 13. As a result of my situation and the way I'm looking at it, that's what he's saying, it has become what? Clear throughout the whole palace garden to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. What is he saying? If they think I'm chained down and can't do anything, I am chained down and I get to do everything I came here for. Because what do I get to do? I am chained to a Roman guard, an imperial guard, who is a person of prominence and respected and has influence and has people that they interact with all the time. Every 6 hours, every day, I get a brand new one that I get to spend 6 hours with. And everyone knows that I am in these chains for Jesus because I have a captive audience that I can preach to. He got his wish. His desire was to preach the gospel in Rome, and he gets to do it every day with someone of influence that can share that message beyond him and take it to the world around them. I can't imagine. Could you imagine being the person chained to him? I wonder what the conversation, I wonder if Paul even ever slept, you know? But the times that he was awake and he spoke, and he would share the gospel. He would talk about their lives. He'd be doing the same kind of things we do, right, with individuals. Hey, tell me about your family. Then he would wrap a story about family and God together. He'd share a little bit about Jesus. He'd probably probe their beliefs and the things they thought about, and he would take a godly perspective and lay it on top of it. And he took this bad situation that he never wanted to be in and looked through it and said, God, can you use this to advance his gospel? I just need to change my perspective about what I'm going through. Now, some of you guys are into martial arts, and I know we have an owner of a jiu-jitsu place here in our congregation. Have you ever seen Aikido? You guys know what that is? If you don't, just Google it. Aikido is a great martial art, which is the art of learning to use your enemy's strength against them. So when someone comes at you, you take what they're doing and you modify the movements to put them exactly where you want them. It's a different kind of martial art. It uses what the enemy thinks is their strength to become their greatest weakness. And so it's, I've never had that done to me. I've watched it done to others. I've seen it. You've seen it in movies as well. They kind of glamorize that whole thing. But it does work, where you can take what someone thinks is a strength for them and use that and turn that against them to control them. It's a great martial art, and what they thought was a strength in imprisoning Paul said, let me flip the script. I'll change my perspective, and I'll use it not against you, really, but for your benefit, because I'm going to teach you the gospel. And what does that tell me? That tells me your misery can become your ministry. What you think you're going through that's so awful, God says, I can use that. I will take that, I will multiply it, I will use it if you're willing to change your perspective and see the good that I can do through it. How many of you know who Chuck Colson is? Raise your hand if you do. Those who don't know, Chuck Colson, you have to go way back to Watergate. If you remember, Chuck Colson was one of the people convicted in Watergate, and he spent time in prison. While he was in prison, he became a follower of Jesus Christ. And he began a ministry in prison that when he got out, he carried on, that still is successful today, that ministers to people in prison and to their families while they're waiting for their loved one to get out of prison. It's a huge ministry that has encompassed the world. He died a few years ago, but the ministry is still strong today because he said, yes, my situation was awful. But God gave me an opportunity, and He gave me a voice. My misery, my situation, my imprisonment became a pulpit for me to preach from that has changed lives because His perspective changed. He wasn't saying, why me? He was saying, now what? Now, God, that I'm in this, what do you want me to do? Where do you want me to go? What do you want to happen? So you're not married and you want to be married. Say, now what? Okay, God, I'm here. What do you want me to do? Well, I'm single. Okay? What is it you want me to do? Now what? Maybe you're in a financial setback at the moment, and you need to say, God, now what? What do you want me to do? Do you want me to grow through this? Do you want me to learn? Honestly, the people that go through financial setbacks and then learn how to handle their finances in a godly way by going through FPU and other things like that are kind of like reformed smokers. They tell everybody about it. Say, you want to find financial freedom? This is how you found it. I was down here and God brought me up here. Let me use what I went through to help you get better. Because you aren't crying about what happened. You're looking for God's purpose because you're looking through the picture, changing your perspective and saying, God can use this for a ministry. He can take my pain and turn it into my pulpit that I can make a difference from. Okay? Whatever it is in life, you can gain that new perspective. So that's the first question. Now what? Not why me, but now what? The second question is this. So what? Okay? So what? So what that I'm going through this? What's the big deal here? I want you to read with me. It's starting in verse 15. It says this. It is true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so in love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of a selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing they can stir up trouble for me while I'm in chains. Notice what he says. Even though there's people out there, right, preaching with wrong motives, he says, but what does it matter? What's he saying? So what? But what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached. And because of this, I rejoice. Hear what he is saying. I know that there are people that are actually cheering the fact that I'm in prison, and they're taking advantage of it to preach the gospel for personal gain or for other reasons, or to put me down and hurt my reputation. He says, you know what? So what? What's the most important thing here? He says, is that the gospel is being preached. Yeah, I could get wrapped around the axle. I could be concerned about that. I could let my heart be heavy with it. I could lose sleep at night over it. But he says, so what? The great thing is the gospel is being preached. And if the gospel is being preached, he's happy about that. He's happy about that. We need to learn to say, so what, in whatever situation we're in, to evaluate it properly. That phrase, what does it matter, is tiskar plain. It literally means, what does it matter? What does it matter? Tiskar plain. What does it matter? When you're in the middle of something, you need to learn to change your perspective and say, tiskar plain. What does this matter? So I've lost my job, and I feel like, what am I going to do now? Tiskar plain. What does it matter? Gain some perspective. Step back. Okay? All right. I'm being challenged with my health. What does it matter right now? Okay? My child isn't doing what I'd hoped they would do. What does it matter? Not saying it doesn't matter. Don't hear the words differently. You ask the question, What does it matter? So what? Is this really important? If you want to know if something is really important, maybe ask yourself a secondary question. Will this matter 100 years from now? Okay? Will this matter, this moment in history, this thing that I'm going through, this situation I find myself in, 100 years from now, is it going to make any difference anyway? And if it isn't, Paul would say, so what? Why are you wrapped around the axle about it? Why are you expending all this emotional energy over it? Why are you making it so difficult for yourself and others when really, so what? It's not that important. It may seem really big, but in the long term, it's really not that big at all. Okay? So you're watching your favorite show on television and the president comes on to give a speech. Oh, I don't get to watch my show. So what? I mean, that's what Netflix is for, right? You can watch it anytime you want, so it gets interrupted. No big deal. So what? Doesn't matter. So you get up in the morning. I don't have this problem, but some of you do, and you look at your hair, and it just doesn't do what you want it to do, right? You can't get it to go the direction, and you're all, so what? What does it matter that you have a bad hair day? It's not going to ruin your life. So what? Tiscar Plain doesn't really matter, does it? 100 years from now, is anybody going to know you had a bad hair day on Monday, June 15th, 2020? They aren't going to care. Why should you care? Right? Does it really matter that way? You know? So you're running late to a big appointment, and you're yelling at the kids, and you're screaming at the people on the road, and you're cursing the stoplights. 100 years from now, is that meeting really going to matter? So what? So what? Change your perspective. So you're working with somebody that says something very unkind and maybe untrue about you. And you're all upset about your name and what people are going to think about you and all that kind of stuff. 100 years from now, is that one statement really going to matter that much? So what? You ask, now what? And then you ask, so what? So that you can gain a new perspective about whatever it is that you're going through. Okay? Some things really matter, and some things simply don't matter at all. Yet we live life so often like everything is a big deal. Okay? When not everything is a big deal. It's just not. And when you recognize what doesn't matter so much, it allows you to focus on what does. Like, for example, what does really matter? Well, God matters. Okay? In every situation, God matters. In every situation, what He has to say about it matters. In every situation, what His Word tells us about it matters. That's what really matters. What else matters? People matter. Okay? People are important to God. They should be important to us. And in whatever situation we find ourselves in, we should step back and say, how does this affect that person? Okay? Instead of making it all about me, maybe we should say that people matter, and we think about what we say, how we respond, and what we do in light of the people that we're dealing with. Because what God would say is put them first. And how do you do that? If you're looking at yourself in your poor situation and woe is me. Now, I'm not minimizing the stuff that you're going through, but it's not why me, it's now what and so what. Does it really matter? You know what else matters? Eternity matters. And what you're going through, how does that affect eternity? How does that affect you personally? How does it affect others? What's it going to make a difference with? You know what else matters? Using our gifts matter. I mean, we should be focusing on more how we can use God's gifts to grow His church and to help others than what others could be doing for us in our situation. God wants us to get a perspective outside of ourselves. And guys, our lifestyle matters. The testimony of our lifestyle matters. You know, it really does. Can I just share something that always disturbs me a little bit? And you're going to think, John, just shut up. You shouldn't talk about this. And that's the very reason I will talk about it. Is because I have that part of me that says, people are going to get upset with you if you talk about this. Way too often, I get involved in Christian activities where I cannot tell whether it's a Christian party or a party the world is throwing. The same amount of alcohol is there. People are talking about the same kinds of things. Stuff is flowing freely. And if I took a snapshot of that party and a snapshot of a world's party, I would ask the question, which one of the two are different? And the answer would be neither. They look exactly the same. You know why that bothers me? Because the image we present to the world matters. The lifestyle we show to the world matters. If we have nothing to offer the world than what the world offers, then what we have does not matter. There are bigger things out there than you're temporarily feeling good about, yourself because you drank a few beers and now you don't think straight. Not against alcohol. That's not what I'm saying. Not against people drinking wine. I'm saying, why does a Christian party have to look like the world's party? Why does a Christian's life have to look so much like the world's life? George Barna would tell you that in all the major areas of concern that should separate us from the world, the statistical numbers are identical for Christians and non-Christians. 35% of Christians get divorced in their first marriage. 35% of non-Christians get divorced in their first marriage. Same number of issues with alcoholism, same number of issues with pornography. The world doesn't look different. I just want to challenge you. Can you look past your perspective on life and see what God wants to do and say, I want you to be different. I want you to change your perspective. You are my ambassadors. You are my reflection on this earth. Does your reflection look different than someone else's? Doesn't mean you're weird. Doesn't mean you're strange. It means you step back and gain perspective and that says, why am I involved in this activity? Why am I even doing this? What do I really get from this that God can't give me? And you change your perspective. And once you grab God's perspective, the way you handle the situation changes completely. And yep, that's one of my pet peeves. I'm sorry if you don't like the fact that I said it. I love you anyway, and you have to love me because it's a command. Okay? It's a command. You got to love me anyway. But if you can show me where my perspective is incorrect, I would challenge you to do so. We are called to be a peculiar and different, not strange, different people. Are we different? What's our perspective? Because Paul had this great perspective about his whole life. And here's what he said. Verse 21, for to me to live is Christ and to die is gain. What is he saying here? He said, guys, I want you to get the picture. For me, I win either way. My perspective is that God is in control and I win. If I am here, I get to live for Christ. So as long as I'm in this prison, if I'm here for 10 years or 2 years or tomorrow they take and execute me, I don't care because today I get to live for Christ. And that's an opportunity that I am thankful for. I don't have to bemoan the fact that I'm a prisoner. I am celebrating the fact that God uses my imprisonment to allow me to write letters, to encourage others, to influence Roman soldiers, to change the dynamic of the other prisoners around us so that they see the world differently. It lets me expand the gospel. And so if I go home to Jesus, I don't get to do that. So while I'm here, I'm thankful for that. But then again, if I get to go home, what a great deal. I don't have to deal with this stuff anymore. I get to be in God's presence. I can be with the creator of the universe. I get to talk to Jesus face to face. I get to enjoy this personal relationship that I don't currently have, that face-to-face relationship, that reality that's out there that's called heaven. So for me, to live is Christ and to die is gain. I can't lose. Okay? What a great perspective. I mean, what he's saying is, God, whatever it is that I'm in, now what do you want me to do? And is this really that important? If it's a so what thing, then don't worry about it. But if it's important, then I should focus on it and regain my proper perspective. So what about you? What about you today in the situations you find yourself in? We all have a what, and we don't always understand the why. True? We all have whats, we don't always understand the why. God always has a why behind every single what. But most importantly, I don't have to understand why to trust God in the what. He doesn't have to show me his plans. I just need to trust them. Because if I look through my picture, there's something on the other side that God wants to do. And are the things that are important to God the things that are important to me? So that I don't waste my time on the things that really don't matter. Okay, so my challenge to you is start to gain a new perspective. Whatever that situation is for you right now, step back and say, okay, God, what are you trying to do here? I know you're in control. What is it you're trying to do? What do you want me to do? And should I really even be upset about it? And if I should, then to live as Christ, to die as gain. Let's choose to look at it the way Paul does. Take our prison, turn it into our pulpit, and make a difference for Jesus. Let's go to God in prayer.